In 1968, UC Berkeley students and activists Emma G. and Yuji Ichioka became the originators of the term Asian American. The purpose of coining this pan-ethnic label was both to combat the label of Oriental, which had taken on a derogatory connotation, as well as to unite different Asian peoples under one banner for the betterment of their political and social representation in America. Their intentions were pure, but over the decades, Asian American and other terms, such as AAPI, have become dangerous generalizations and marginalization of many unique and distinct cultures and groups of people in America. These terms are unfair and unreliable labels for a great variety of peoples in America, and their prevalence threatens mislabeling, misrepresentation, and identity erosion towards the people living under these demographics. So, how can labels placed on such a broad and diverse demographic be harmful? AAPI, or Asian American Pacific Islander, is a term that gets thrown around a lot. Any survey that takes account of race probably gives something like Asian/Pacific Islander as an option. But why are two different and already heterogeneous communities being grouped together to feign a single demographic? More importantly, how could this coagulation be harmful to the people living under these given identities? From the perspective of someone identifying as a Pacific Islander, an essay by Karenna Meredith offers more insight into how the AAPI label can create turmoil for people within the less represented half of this classification. Meredith cites how Pacific Islanders make up only about 0.4 of the American population, and the voice of these people is often lost within a larger group made up of other communities. According to Professor Rick Bonis, you risk marginalizing certain groups that are not as powerful or as hegemonic as the more vocal groups in that category. That's what's happening to AAPI. As Meredith puts it, the diversity pushed by the AAPI label is purely decorative. It does little to nothing to elevate the voices of Pacific Islanders if they're the minority within a minority group. The AAPI label given to these people by society carries the possibility of additional turmoil and confusion within communities that have already been vulnerable to misrepresentation for decades. And this only brings up larger questions about representation. Generalized forms of classification are perhaps most harmful to Asian American representation when used in conjunction with widely accepted societal myths, chief among them the infamous model minority myth. Common phrasing of the model minority myth often asserts that Asian Americans are amongst the highest earners and most well-educated people in the nation. And while this may be true of certain groups, when observing the actual data regarding the intricacies of the broader Asian American demographic, the model minority myth is alarmingly misrepresentative of smaller, more underrepresented groups falling under the Asian American umbrella. A 2021 publication by the Pew Research Center cites data from 2019 revealing that Asian Americans possess significant disparities in English proficiency, income, and poverty rates between ethnic groups. One thing that I noticed is that the study repeatedly mentions Burmese Americans in this regard, revealing that their poverty rate is more than twice the national average. Their median household income is the lowest amongst Asian Americans, and their English proficiency rate is just 38%. Most of this could possibly be attributed to the fact that 68% of the Burmese American population arrived in the States 10 or less years prior to the study, many as refugees. Compared to larger majority groups such as Japanese, Filipino, or Indian Americans, the Burmese American community has a very different experience under very different circumstances. When news outlets or government officials discuss Asian Americans, are they really reflecting on minority groups such as Burmese Americans? Are they taking the unique struggles and experiences of these underrepresented communities into account? Or are they referring to Asian Americans by the majorities that have much louder and more prevalent voices? The status of communities such as Burmese Americans is lost within the blanket term Asian American, which is applied to very different groups of people herded together and commonly represented by majority communities and skewed statistics. Of course, the disease of generalization doesn't just have harmful implications for entire communities. It trickles down to the individuals who are subject to the consequences of misrepresentation. One of the most meaningful articles I read in my research was What It Means to Be Asian in America, which coincides with a study that highlights diverse individual experiences and forms broader observations about the relationship between these unique groups of people and pan-ethnic labels. The article's most prominent theme is found in its opening line. No experience defines what it means to be Asian in the United States today. And yet, the terms referring to these people are used to identify a loosely connected spectrum as one group rather than a great many individual groups, eroding the identities of distinct communities and the individuals found within them. As a Nepalese immigrant woman says, it is difficult to identify as Nepali American since there are no options in forms. The term Asian is also used to sanitize the unfamiliar. As a Bhutanese immigrant woman describes, there are some people who have no idea about Bhutan, so we end up introducing ourselves as Asian. We see from these experiences that Asian American labels can box people into occupying or adopting a generalization that does little to justly represent them. This creates dissonance for individuals who have a hard time having to identify between their ethnic origin and a more widely recognized pan-ethnic label. It makes people feel like they have to adopt labels like Asian or Asian American or AAPI to be recognized and accepted, and it shouldn't be that way. Asian folks shouldn't be afraid to wear their flags, and they shouldn't have to be boxed into such a blurry and misrepresentative form of self-identification on things like surveys that are used to represent them in a way where they will be lost in a sea of distinct others. The labels of Asian American or AAPI and other similar terms bring up so many questions on ethical Asian American representation through common rhetoric. Where does the responsibility lie for giving Pacific Islanders a voice if they are lost amongst Asian Americans? How can we more justly represent smaller groups such as Burmese Americans when they are lumped into a demographic that skews representation away from their particular needs and issues? Why are we coagulating all these different communities into a false homogeny in the first place? And most importantly, are the people under this demographic thinking about what the labels given to them mean to them, their identities, and their communities? I hope we are, because while these terms may have been birthed from good intentions to unite and stabilize our communities, over time they have served to erode individual identities and marginalize and confuse different peoples.